So I'm Brian Mason. I'm first responder chaplain for Wellness for Warriors. And many already know how I came to be a chaplain. For those who don't, or may be curious, when I set out to become a professional chaplain, I didn't have the idea of being a first responder chaplain. I just wanted to be a professional hospital chaplain. And but through several encounters with key people, first responders, air care, EMS, ER nurses, and at least one doctor, it was thought that, hey, you would be a good chaplain for first responders because you understand and you get them. And one even said, you're really good with first responders. You have a lot of compassion and relatability to them, and just always had good connection and rapport. And but he also followed it with, because he's heard me say it more than once, you don't care of their religious history, their personality. A lot of them are type A, and a lot of them are kind of rough around the edges. So race, sexual choice, short, fat, skinny, tall, you connect with them all. But I may have said you're a poet and you don't know it. But at any rate, I worked hospital security before in my past life once I got out of the Army. And I'm married to a physician who, she's a family doc, but she also doubles as an emergency room physician. So I've worked a little bit out there, so I have a good understanding about the first responder world. And I just didn't give it any thought until I worked here getting my clinical hours, and then I pursued it and I became a certified first responder chaplain. So here we are today, and the last 2.5 years I've been really speaking out of and lecturing out of this book mostly, Bulletproof Spirit by Dan Willis, but also Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, which it was geared towards cops because it's written by a former cop who became a psychologist, but it's a good emotional survival guide for any first responder. And then Mindfulness for Warriors by Kim Colgrove. And it really teaches, got some good methods in there for developing your mindfulness and self-awareness. And then Tanya Glenn's First Responder Resilience. It's also a really good one to help you build and maintain resilience. I prefer this one because it seems like it has all of these wrapped up into one. And this book is required reading at the National FBI Academy. So every Friday in May, I'll be discussing this book. It was written by Dan Willis. He's a retired police officer from La Mesa, California. Spent 30 years there. Road patrol, detective. He investigated a lot of, lack of a better way to put it, grotesque and pretty disturbing cases. And that's also my disclaimer for this is, I'll be talking about some things from this book that is pretty graphic, pretty traumatic stories that happen to real people. And it's not just, although it was written by a cop, he's got, each chapter is a little different. You got law enforcement, you got EMS, dispatchers, of course, who are the first responders and have typically been the forgotten, first responder, but they're the first ones that are involved. When you call 911 for help, you know, and they're pretty powerless in what, you know, they can do, and they have no closure usually, unless, you know, it's not too crazy busy and the responding officer or whoever the report taker is calls and lets them know. They usually, you know, and I can't imagine having that job and, you know, listening to really bad things happening on the other end, or hearing someone take their last breath. So that leads me to the first chapter in this book, and I'm going to try, probably some of these chapters I'm going to just do one per week, and then others there'll be clumped together because they go together. And so the chapter 1 is the warning signs and self-awareness. I harp a lot about self-awareness and mindfulness to every first responder I get a chance to talk to. And working in the emergency room, I encounter many law enforcement, but mostly pre-hospital services like your flight crews, ambulance crews, and emergency room workers. So, which I also consider first responders, because you know, and a lot of what they experience is vicarious trauma. If you know what that is, it's, you know, it's not direct, but it's indirect. They get them after the fact usually, unless it's a drop and run, and we get those, which is pretty wild. I don't know how anybody could drop a friend off, you know, at the emergency room, and they're unresponsive, and then leave, you know. Anyway, so chapter 1, the warning signs and self-awareness. The first story is of a police officer in La Mesa that was 5 minutes from clocking out. And if there's anybody here that's been a first responder or knows a first responder, some of the biggest cases, some of your biggest events happen within a few minutes of going off duty, which turns into maybe at least an all-nighter, you know. Turns an 8-hour shift into a 24-hour shift, just like that. And anyway, he came across a brutal rape in progress, and he had to kill the guy, right? And that was 1986. And then nobody was doing a real good job of preparing people for what they were going to experience. I mean, some, I'm sure you get into, you know, you have a pretty good chance of being involved in a shooting or something bad. You know, but you got in it to help because you have compassion for others. You have a heart of compassion. And so he got in this officer-involved shooting, and he had to kill the guy. You know, the entire episode lasted less than 30 seconds. You know, 1 life was taken, and 2 lives were permanently altered for life. I mean, a lot of people don't understand. I would venture to guess that 99.9% of people that get into law enforcement, they don't get in it to maybe like take somebody out someday. They can't wait, you know, they're just itching. That's totally a misnomer, because most of the time, I think I had the percentages at one time, but most of the time, most officers in law enforcement, you got to think there's thousands of them across America. Most of them never draw their duty weapon in the course of their duties. They don't have to. I mean, it's a really small percentage that do, And then when something does happen, it's a matter of seconds. You got to make a split-second decision. It's so fast. We had a guy that's one of our volunteers that's retired police lieutenant, and he had an officer-involved shooting, and the whole episode, he said, lasted 7.1 seconds. You know, and it was recorded on a dash cam. And that's just pretty wild, you know. You've got, it's really fast, and and they're human. So Troy, this officer Troy, was not equipped. They didn't teach him in the academy how to handle, they didn't teach him emotional survival techniques. And that's where Gil Martin's done a really good job of teaching that and speaking on it. And he also has some other really good ideas. I encourage you to read that book too, or listen to any podcast that he does, because they really get into some detail and some good stuff that is current. And it's really helpful. So Officer Troy got imprisoned by the side effects of being involved in taking a life and not knowing what to do. So before long, you know, his spirit and his attitude went sideways, and people didn't recognize him anymore. And you know this is happening every day in law enforcement, EMS, fire. And I guess that's the crux of this chapter that I want to get across is, if you know somebody or a family member and you start noticing changes, noticeable changes, approach them about it in a tactful way, you know, in a way that will hopefully encourage them to reach out. And there's plenty of resources out there where you can reach out anonymously. There's 800 numbers you can call, and you don't even have to talk to somebody in your region. I know that's a big hang-up for men and women in first responder roles, and I understand that, because you know we're a pretty small community, large but small, and the likelihood of running into somebody because of mutual aid agreements is pretty great. And I know there's people that would not divulge whatever, you know, confidentiality you had in them, but to know that there are numbers you can call and get somebody outside your area, I hope that helps, you know, facilitate you taking a role in smashing the stigma and reversing the status quo. It's okay to help or reach out for help. It's a lot better than bottling it up and it taking root in your spirit and running your life, people taking their own lives, which is, you know, I got in it because I want to help first responders in any way I can, you know, spiritually and whatever else. Doesn't matter. I can put on many different hats, but if we can reduce just one life, you know, it's all worth it, because 22 veterans a day, that's one too many. And you know, law enforcement there's some stats I'll share here in a little bit from the National Health Institute, but it's pretty sobering and disturbing at the same time. But so Officer Troy, he did get the tools and equipment. He did overcome, and that's what a lot of these stories in here are. There are many stories from different disciplines, law enforcement, dispatchers, fire, police. I think there may be even one military story in here, or briefly. but a lot of your first responders are former military. Probably, I would venture to guess that most of them are, because it seems like the next thing to do, you know, especially the double dippers, right? So, hi Hank. So the first component of wellness is understanding the 9 warning signs, but I would also equally important in promoting your healing and getting by the effects that post-traumatic stress has. And for the record, I no longer call it post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, because I'm in the camp, it's not a disorder. It's an injury. It's an injury to your spirit. It's an injury to your mind. It's not a disorder. It can be dealt with. It can be overcome or learnt to live with and deal with. It doesn't have to take you out literally, or it doesn't have to take you out from what you love doing. And more on that later. So the 9 warning signs that if you recognize in yourself or someone else recognizes in you, and that's, to start that though, communication. You know, this is much about family as it is the first responder. And there are classes out there, there are counselors out there that can help you communicate better. Because if you're not a first responder and you don't have a good understanding, you're probably not going to handle it as you should. And that creates a lot of dissension, a lot of fights, and a lot of divorces. But if you're able to communicate and like having a crappy shift, you know, and coming home and just telling your spouse you need 5 or 10 minutes to decompress, you know, without either being confrontational or rude about it, you know, just need 5 or 10 minutes. It was a bad shift. And you don't have to go into details. They don't need to know all the details, because then you're passing on that vicarious trauma, you know, and I mean, unless they're a first responder as well, you know, like my wife and I, we can share the gory details if we need to, because, you know, because of our jobs. And so we can do that, but we're still kind of sparingly in that, because you don't want to add to the other person's junk in the closet, if you will. So anyway, the first one of the first warning signs that you may or may not be that you are, I shouldn't say that. I misspoke. That you are probably experiencing some PTSI, isolation. How many is like guilty of that? You know, without even knowing it, realizing it when it's happening. You know, I noticed recently that I was isolating, and it was funny that I caught myself, because I normally don't. It's not been my history to catch myself, you know, isolating, but I sure was, and that's not healthy. You know, that's where you need to be intentional about your overall health, because nobody's going to do it for you. If you're suffering or struggling, or you know, you've lost your heart, you've hardened your heart, or thinking of ending it all or leaving your field that you got into because you want to help and serve people, you need to recognize the signs and then seek help. It's okay to seek help. You know, it's been said it takes more courage to reach out than it does to suck it up and or take the easy way out, you know. So recognize if you're isolating, right? Number 2, irritability. How many have experienced that from, you know, in your personal life, brought home work? You know, try not to bring home work. I try to leave it outside, just like I leave home at home when I get here. I can't tell you how many times I was pressed by people when they know I'm a chaplain. Well, what religion are you? What church are you with? And I'm like, it doesn't matter right here. What matters is you, you know. I leave mine at the door when I come in, you know. And so it's all about you. So do that, you know, try to, we know when we're being irritable. And, you know, because we do a check, we do a self-check. Am I hungry? Or your wife or husband will ask you, do you need to eat? My bride does. My bride's like, are you hangry or are you just really mad about something? So maybe you just need to eat, you know. Difficulty sleeping. I bet there's nobody who's had difficulty sleeping. That's had stressful jobs or been in battle, or whether it be on the street or in the war theater, you know. Nobody has difficulty sleeping. And I know one thing, there's a lot of things that help sleep, and one I'm guilty of not doing enough of, but getting a consistent night's rest instead of like 4 hours here, 5 hours there, 4, 8, you know, and going to bed at different times, and diet and exercise. I'm guilty of having caffeine too close to going to bed, so I try and back it off each day, like don't have any caffeine past this time, or you're going to have trouble sleeping. And it all boils down to, I said earlier, being intentional. You got to be intentional, because nobody's going to do it for you, and it only creates tension between you and your significant other if you're asking them to help you manage, you know. Hey, should you be having that coffee right now, or shouldn't you be going to bed right now? That's almost like you have that teenager response. Because, you know, hey, don't tell me what to do, I'm an adult, you know. But, so difficulty sleeping, you work on that. Diet, exercise. Sometimes, you know, temporarily medication help. I don't advocate pills. If you can get away without, do so. But, you know, I was on anxiety pills for a while, because stuff used to get overwhelming, and I just did it. It was a temporary thing, and not so much a crutch, but just get over the hump. Anger. So anger's been one of my weak points, but not with people or in front of people. Nobody sees it. It's in private, but I can tell you, if you've done it or haven't done it, it does suck the life out of you. You know, I feel it physiologically after I have, you know, one of my private meltdowns. So, anger, I don't know, I guess one of the best things to do is what my mother says, don't sweat the small stuff. You know, or think about it, is it really worth, you know, getting that angry over? Are you still going to be mad about it in 5 days, 5 weeks? You know, probably not. I mean, most of us are pretty resilient, and it passes, anger. But if you find yourself getting angry, difficulty sleeping, isolating, being irritable, you're probably suffering some of the effects of PTS, post-traumatic stress. Emotional numbness, apathy, disengagement with life. That's a biggie in the world of first responders. I see it pretty much every day with ER staff, EMS, because you see the same thing, the same people over and over and over. And if that's starting to be an issue, like you're getting numb, cold heart, apathy, disengagement with life, like it really doesn't matter, because apparently I'm not having an effect because I keep seeing the same person, you know? I keep hauling the same person in. And it just seems like a vicious cycle or never-ending cycle that can't be fixed. And people tend to give up trying. So if you're noticing that, you probably got it. 6, lack of communication. That's real important, especially on the home front and with whomever you work with most, your partner. Communication, you know, it's like that's one of the keys to a good, healthy marriage, is communication. Yeah, even the hard talks, you know. Sometimes we have to set those aside for a day or sleep on it because it just gets too hot. So you just gotta like put a moratorium on it or put it on the table, you know, for a day. And but not talking about something is going to affect you worse, because again, that goes back to bottling up stuff. And most first responders have an uncanny knack for bottling stuff up until one day it's like, and I'm talking from personal experience. It happens to be about once every 6 months, you know, and it's hard on the system. So I try to recognize, you know, when it's coming up. But if things are affecting you from work or personal life, feelings, depression, anxiety, helplessness, anger, fear, other negative emotions, if you're not talking about it with somebody, you know, find somebody you trust, find a counselor. But if you're a first responder, make sure that counselor has first responder experience, because a lot of good-hearted and good, you know, licensed counselors have ruined a lot of first responders because they weren't equipped to deal with them. They didn't have the training or the experience to deal with first responders, because they're like a whole different breed of their own. And it's not a bad thing, it's just that that's the way it is. There's a difference, just because of the nature of the work. They see things every shift and meet people every shift from all socioeconomic backgrounds, you know, just all kinds of backgrounds and you're meeting people at the worst moment in their lives. You're meeting them in crisis and traumatic situations. So, yeah, learn to communicate, learn to reach out and talk with somebody. So the 7th one is cynicism, distrust, and lack of work satisfaction. I think we see that a lot as well in first responders, especially the last 2 years, 2.5 years. I think it's starting to simmer down a little, but it got really bad. And even me, a people person, a chaplain, I mean, I love people. I love helping people. I love serving. I love seeing people and being with them and doing what I can to help them or encourage them to be the best version of themselves and overcome whatever's going on in their life. But sometimes, you know, I get a little cynical and distrustful and lose some work satisfaction, you know, because for whatever reasons, there's a lot of reasons why these things happen, but sometimes I do get peopled out and I just want to be alone. And that's okay for a little while, but if you're isolating all the time, that's not healthy. And the key is finding healthy ways to manage your self-care. You know, and there's all kinds of things out there to do that. Somebody asked me the other day, one of our paramedics, he's really struggling right now. He asked me what I did for self-care and healthy self-care instead of like, you know, getting plastered, you know, or going on any binge drinking or whatever, you know. I like to read. Music's an outlet for me. I like all genres, and so I'll do that. And I also like working with my hands. I like building stuff, painting, not art painting, but like painting houses and such. I like tearing up stuff. There's nothing that's quite like liberating and getting the cobwebs out as taking a sledgehammer to something, or going to batting cages. I know there's golfers who go driving range, you know, knock the snot out of the ball, and it's therapeutic. Whatever's healthy, do that. There's people that cooking, horseback riding, walking, hiking. I know several people in all first responder disciplines that they hike. They like to hike. They go hiking. They go rock climbing. But if you're doing that and you're finding yourself taking unnecessary risk or going alone without, you know, a wingman, then you might be suffering from a little PTSI and wanting, you know, might have a subconscious self-harm, you know, thing going on. Depression's number 8. Depression's part of the work. People think there's something wrong with them, or that they're crazy, or I shouldn't be depressed, you know. But it happens. And that's why I say when a critical incident happens, or, you know, traumatic incident, critical/trauma, to talk about it as soon as possible, because that's one of the greatest steps towards healing and recovery, is sharing your story. And if you've never shared your story, find somebody to share it with. Find a professional counselor, find somebody you trust, another first responder who's peer support trained. Doesn't have to be in the same organization or the same job. I know of police officers that talk to firefighters that are peer support specialists, and vice versa. EMS police or EMS fire, and some military. You can go across, because it's a lot of the same experiences, the same people you're dealing with, the same incident maybe. So yes, talking about it, knowing that depression is not permanent. I mean, most of the time it's not, and I would venture to guess, I know there's a lot of mental health issues out there, and they say something like, I don't know, 3 out of 5 or 1 out of 5 people, humans, anybody, suffers from depression or some kind of mental health at some point in their life. And so that's really unavoidable. The key is how you handle it, respond to it. And like the other things, the critical incidents, the stressful moments, the stress, the bad things, is talking about them as soon as possible afterwards. And it's going to help you in the long run to avoid the negative stuff that, you know, can have a detrimental effect on your physical health, your mental health. But depression is going to happen. Most of the time it's temporary. It only lasts for a little bit. It happens all the time in the emergency room where I work. But I'll say it, and I'll say it out loud. Well, that was pretty depressing, you know, or that was depressing. And then you just kind of talk about it, and it's a lot better than bottling it up. If you bottle it up, it's going to catch up with you. And it's going to catch up with you when you least expect it. All the first responders I've spoke with or counseled, you know, that's how we get to the point of counseling, is it came out of nowhere and it knocked their feet out from underneath them. And they sometimes turn to non-healthy ways, you know, to cope, such as the last one, drinking as a perceived need, and other addictive compulsive behaviors, like taking risks. If you go rock climbing, if you go hiking and you go by yourself, and you know, and you take more risk than normal. There's a police officer I know that had some pretty strong post-traumatic stress, you know, PTS, and before he got help, he did recognize relatively fast that he was taking unnecessary risks. He was not waiting for backup when he should have. You know, just taking too many risks on and off the job, and it caught up with him. You know, so, but he got help, and he's back on the job. The second component of wellness is self-awareness and being self-aware. And I think everybody pretty much knows what that is. But being mindful of when you feel yourself going out of normal, out of your base, you know, it can get, you know when your spirit is suffering from the toxic effects from the job. Everybody knows it, everybody acknowledges it. But what do they do once they acknowledge it, you know, and accept it? Well, they move on because they have a job to do. And, you know, that's fine if you're still on duty and you're on the clock. It's like the emergency department. You know, some days, some nights are really super busy, and there's trauma after trauma after trauma. Bad traumas, you know. My first overnight shift as a chaplain, there was a homicide, and there was an attempted homicide, 2 different unrelated cases, a few hours apart, and then another critical injury from an accident, or I shouldn't say accident, crash. Most crashes are human error, and then there's your accidents. But we just went on. We didn't stop to debrief or talk about it. We just went on because we had a job to do. And that's much like it is, you know, especially when you're on the battlefront. You don't have time to debrief, you know, because those knuckleheads on the other side are still firing on you, you know. You don't have time to pause and think about it. But when the smoke clears and the dust settles, that's when, you probably should all get together and just debrief. I encourage anybody to go to a debriefing. I know that most, they're not going to talk. They don't want to talk. But there's almost always one person that's going to talk. And the facilitators are going to talk. So seeds are going to be planted, ideas are going to be planted, and it's helpful to do that debriefing as soon as possible afterwards. Then the self-awareness questions, right? How do you deal with loss, pain, suffering, and a sense of helplessness? And I think about dispatchers when I read that question, because they are. I mean, they know that the call they took and dispatch, and usually it's two different people, but still they're in the same room, they know. That something bad happened, somebody died, maybe in a horrible way, and you're just helpless. You're paralyzed because you're trapped in a room, usually with no windows and a bunch of computer screens. And the phone's still ringing because people still need help elsewhere. So there's no time to pause there either. But be mindful that, this happened and we can deal with it later, but don't put it off. Get with others, talk with somebody, find a group. We have groups that are meeting weekly and bi-weekly. Check us out on the Wellness for Warriors website. Yeah. Had some brain gas going on. It's Wellness for Warriors website or Facebook. But chapter 1, to sum it up, is pretty much discussing the warning signs that you're being affected by your job, and you want to take care of it as soon as you can before it catches up with you and you either get fired or something bad happens and you get sued or you go to jail. Nobody gets in it to leave, and nobody gets into marriage to get divorced or leave their kids, So it's important to discuss the warning signs and self-awareness, not only with your coworkers, but with your family. Family is super important because they know you and they see you, and your coworkers see you as much or more of the time, depending on your job. Professional, it keeps you, the better you take care of yourself and the better you take care of each other, the better you're going to be for those you serve. That you got into the business to serve because you care and you want to make a difference in people's lives. And keep that heart of compassion alive. Get familiar with the 9 warning signs. Self-awareness, mindfulness. This is pretty good. She covers different methods of that. And some are Eastern, some are Western, some are in the middle. The point is learning and practicing mindfulness. It's helped me immensely because I can catch myself when I'm getting too excited, anxious, is what I mean, anxious, or angry, And you got to pause and think, well, is it me? Is it them? All right, but the way I call it is, do I have my soft shirt on today? Or do I have my hard shirt on? Because sometimes, somebody can say the same thing in the same tone There's just the same body language. And one day I'll take it like it should be, just, good. And then the next day I might offended or I'm hurt. And so be mindful of yourself and check out these books. Check out Bulletproof Spirit. We're going to talk more about it. Just being self-aware, get the training to learn emotional survival. And Dr. Gil Martin's book is a good one on that. But there's also some good information in here in a later chapter about it. Being self-aware and self-care is part of that. Don't neglect yourself, whether it be physical, mental, spiritual, because the better you take care of yourself, the better you're going to be able to take care of others, the better you're going to do your job. And everybody wins. The last thing I want to mention is smashing the stigma, smashing the status quo. Because way too many people are still taking their own lives. I mentioned earlier, I think we're still at 22 veterans a day, and I'm not sure the breakdown of that as far as active duty or not active duty. Do you know?
I don't know.
I heard the other day in a podcast, it's I think it's one active duty a day, and then the rest are.
The percentage they put out is if the public is 1, if you have a baseline of 1, that's the public. A service member is 1.5 times as likely to commit suicide as a member of the public. A firefighter is 1.4 times. Police officer is around 1.4 times or 1.39 times.
Yeah.
And a first responder is also 1.39 times or so as likely.
That's what I was getting ready to read, and this is from the NIH,
Yeah.
National Institute of Health, right? Said, and this was as of November. Law enforcement officers and firefighters are more likely to die by suicide than in the line of duty.
Yeah.
EMS providers are 1.39 times more likely to die by suicide than the general public. Studies have found that between 17 and 24% of public safety telecommunicators, your dispatchers, have symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and 24% have symptoms of depression. Telecommunicators are often the very first responders, and research on their suicide risk and mental health has lagged, and they find that unacceptable, and I think so too. And I think there's a lot that we don't know about that maybe got mislabeled or not reported, But given that, we need to do more, to prepare people. They're hitting the academies and the training facilities really well these days, but still doesn't seem like we're doing enough. That's why we need to smash the stigma and smash the status quo that it's okay to reach out. More and more commanders and leadership of organizations are getting on board with that. Now some of the old timers, rank and file, they still believe in sucking it up, you got a job to do, move on. But if that's so effective, then why is suicide still the #1 killer of them? I mean, I know of a state trooper in North Carolina. He was 80 years old. He was post-retirement by 20 years and took his own life. So that's where we need to get better at setting up support networks for folks who retire, because I think that's a fear of a lot of first responders, and I hear it especially in the police and in the police section, that you lose your support network when you're gone. You know, you're like become an outsider, and even some, organizations, they don't allow the retirees to still keep their gym access. And that's got to change. There's got to be something out there. Maybe these groups that we're setting up around here, you know, check us out. We have 412 on Wednesday nights, every other Wednesday at the Y on Republic. And I'm doing peer reinforcement, decompression space every other Saturday at the Library Center. There's guitar therapy for veterans, yoga. I'm forgetting something, Mike, but I can't remember what it is. Is that all of them?
Well, of course, this meeting every Friday
And
morning.
this meeting every Friday,
Mhm.
so.
You mentioned Dr. Good on Wednesdays.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
in guitar
there's
therapy.
guitar
Mhm.
therapy, Dr. Tommy Good on Wednesdays. And so check us out, check those things out, get out, don't isolate. And if you come to any of the meetings, you don't have to talk. There will be others there talking. And but the fact that you show up, I believe is a good first step. And then even sharing your story, if you don't have somebody or don't think you have somebody, write it out. You don't have to mail it. You know, write it out to yourself, write it to God, write it to, you know, whomever. But get your story out. Getting your storytelling is one of the greatest first steps you can take towards facilitating healing and being able to get back to as most of a normal life as possible, to where it's not stumping your growth. Because we never stop growing, we never stop learning. Truman is a living testimony of that.
That's right.
So, take care, everybody. I hope to see you next week.